Hello, I'm Connor Lifson, and this is TABLEWORK, a TAPS podcast series where we interview the artists and theater makers behind our productions on what it takes to get their productions from the page to the stage. This episode features Daniel Jackson, a fourth-year PhD candidate in TAPS. Join us as he talks about his upcoming production of The Unit Operations Here Are Highly Specific on the TAPS developmental stage. It opens May 8th in Pigott Theater. Hi, Daniel. I am thrilled to be in conversation with you about your upcoming production. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for inviting me.
Can you start off by telling us a little bit about the project that you're working on, what it's called, and anything else we should know up front?
Sure. So the project is called The Unit Operations Here Are Highly Specific. And the way that I've been explaining it to people is that it's essentially a dance performance. So there's a choreographed performance, and you go to see it the way you would see any other dance performance in a theater. But as an audience member, you get a pair of headphones, and you can choose and switch between 10 different audio tracks that have been composed for the performance, so composed for the movement that has been choreographed.
Fantastic. And I'm curious, like, where did this idea kind of originate from? Like, what was the initial seed for this project for you?
I've been thinking, or had been at the time, thinking a lot about how people watch things and sort of where meaning comes from in performance. And so the original impulse sort of came from the idea of watching a performance, but having a different experience of that performance based on sound, really.
Hmm. And so the audience is going to be able to switch between these different soundtracks. Don't no worries if you don't want to spoil anything for us. But are these music? Is it speaking? Like what do you know about these audio tracks? Are they super all different from one another?
Yes, so they are super all different from one another, and I'm trying to not get too involved in what they sound like or what they are, but I can say that it's three composers and two playwrights or people who work with performance texts. So two of the audio channels are going to be performance texts, so mostly voice, and then three of the other channels are going to be musical for sure, and then we're still playing around with we have 10 channels total that we can play with, so we're still playing around with what the other 5 channels are. So it might be we're thinking about, it might be the commentary from the dancers, or literally like the what the dancers say to themselves while they're performing. um
Mm.
so we have some flexibility around that still. We just haven't decided.
That sounds really exciting. So this is a devising process, and we've had a couple of devising shows in the season already. But what's exciting to me is that everyone tackles the process of devising differently. So can you tell us a little bit about how you're structuring this devising process, like both in the conceiving of it, which you've already talked about a little bit, and also in rehearsal?
Yeah, so it's been somewhat complicated. So there's a way in which, so like when I originally thought about the way that this would happen, the choreography sort of came would come first, and
Mm.
then composers would be invited to compose to that choreography. But that turned out to be impossible just because of everyone's schedules. So we have to all have a central kind of text that we can devise to or on or around. Um, and so that includes me and the dancers, but also the composers, and the lighting designer, and actually the set designer also, all have this sort of central text that we're building on top of. Um, and my hope anyway, is that that central text in performance, that central text can kind of fall away, so that there might be remnants of it, but you don't have to like have seen it in order to understand what you're watching. Um, and a lot of that comes down to sort of timing. So like the timing of music is really important to the timing of the physical performances. Um, but I'm hoping to sort of be surprised by the relationships when everything comes together.
That makes a ton of sense. In the so this central text that's kind of at the heart of this process, is that a written text that you're playing with, or is this some kind of visual? In some of your materials you talked about a visual score.
Yeah. So the central text that we're all using is it's an old episode. Well, it's an episode of an old sitcom called Together We Stand. It's, I think, the pilot episode of the sitcom. Um, and it stars a bunch of famous people. Elliot Gould is in it. There weren't very many episodes, and it is kind of a traditional sort of American family sitcom. And the reason that I went with that is because it's not a very well-known sitcom, I think. So there's like no people don't have like an emotional attachment to it. But also I wanted something that, like, if you think about what kind of media has the least sort of um emotionally driven blocking, or like the least kind of expressive movement style, I think the American sitcom is up there. um
Yeah, absolutely. It
yeah.
because I mean, in some ways, because it's such a formulaic genre.
Right.
Um, and so yeah, okay, this is real interesting because then you've got this seemingly like very open ended devising process,
Uh-huh.
um, off of what sounds to me like a very open text that you've chosen.
Yes, although then, so we're being very specific in the choreography about sort of where people are on stage and the timings of their actions on stage. So for instance, if someone in the video, I don't know, picks up a fork, then one of the performers, the physical performers, has to do something at that moment, um,
Mm,
but not probably pick up a fork.
yeah. Okay, this leads nicely into the next question I was going to ask you, which is like as a director slash deviser, um, when you're kind of approaching this task of directing a performance with really varying audience experiences, um, like I'm curious about the role of specificity here. And it sounds to me like in some ways it's kind of not necessarily like a trail of breadcrumbs, but you're leaving little moments where the actual like moments of meaning, of connection between scores, but not necessarily kind of a scripted meaning about what audiences might take from that. Would that be like a fair understanding?
Yeah, totally. I think that there's no, yeah, and this has been something that has actually been sort of difficult to reckon with, is that I think oh, this sounds so pretentious, but like I think that people are used to watching a performance that says something in some way, like that the performance itself contains a message that I'm trying to, or that the performers are trying to transmit to an audience. And I think that this project, I mean, the intention of this project is that the meaning of the project does not sit in any one place. Um, and so like I am purposely trying not to interfere with the composers who are writing the scores, because I don't want to impose my idea of what meaning should be transmitted to the audience. And so like in addition to different kinds of aesthetics of the audio scores, I'm hoping that they have also different relationships to the performance. Um, they might be narrating the actions of the performance. They might be, I don't, it could, someone could turn in a monologue about their cat, and that would be what one of the soundtracks would be.
This is so fascinating because I'm doing a bunch of reading right now for my own research on like really early, like when the profession of a theater director kind of came into existence, late 19th century, early 20th century, and so much of the focus of a lot of that theorizing about what this role of the director would be is about unity, right? Is about cohering all of these disparate elements into like a cohesive united vision. um and it's interesting to me, like I don't have the historical background for before that time, but it's interesting to me to think about how ingrained this assumption of unity of meaning, and unity of aesthetic is, like just in the way, like it's really just baked into the way that we make theater, at least in this country. And so it's interesting, the process you're describing is fascinating to me in some ways, just because it sounds like the way you're treating the role of a director is, um, like to interrupt the natural progression towards some kind of cohesive unified meaning of a thing.
Yeah, and I think yes, absolutely. And I think that like the conception of the project is to shift the meaning from the experience to a kind of meta level of having the experience and noticing that the control of the experience is sort of in your hands. And I think that noticing of control is something that I hope the audience experiences, but I also am really interested in not like I don't know how individual audience members are going to see the show. Like I literally don't know what they're going to hear. And so I'm interested in I don't know if this is like how I'm going to do this, but like I'm interested in hearing from people about their individual experiences after the show. I don't know, maybe it's like a survey or something like that. Cuz I have no idea.
So I don't know at what point in your process you're going to receive, like at what point you're going to collect all of these different audio scores that are there.
Mhm.
But I'm assuming you'll have them at least by the time you go into tech, or during the tech process. So I'm curious, like, are you anticipating like during tech taking on the role of a proxy audience member and kind of enacting this process of switching between these different audio tracks, like in rehearsal, to get a sense for what that might be like? Or do you think that might not actually be useful the way you're thinking about this?
I'm going to do as much as I can of that to get yeah, just to get a sense of what the experience will be like. But there really is there's no way there it's an infinite amount of potential like ways to watch the show. If you choose one track and stick with it all the way through, then there's only 10 ways that you can see the show. But if you switch at any moment, suddenly that's an extra way. And because they're not like because it's not switch points, because you can switch at any time, there's an infinite number of potential soundtracks for the show, essentially. Um, and so my the way I'm thinking of my job during tech is to like test everything and make sure that it will work as an experience for the audience, but not make judgment calls about the way that the soundtracks and the performances are sort of sitting together or interacting. Um, Although I do hope that I can give the composers a little bit of lead time so that each composer can watch the performance and listen to their own track and then make any adjustments that they want to make.
Oh, sure. Oh, that's fascinating. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned earlier this kind of emphasis on surprise, and you're midway through the process already, and I'm curious, like, what has surprised you so far? I mean, you had a really clear idea going into this about the concept, but what's been surprising to you so far in your process?
I think that so I guess it just it's been really surprising to me how baffled people are by this project. Um, and it took me a while to realize that like as a as a performer, there's something really disconcerting about the idea that you don't know how people are going to watch your performance. Um, which is like always true. Like every person who watches even a traditional performance is bringing all of their own stuff to that viewership relationship. But but I guess I didn't I didn't realize how terrifying it could be for someone to be standing on stage and not sort of know what they are performing because they are missing some vital aspect of that performance. Um, so that was really surprising to me, and it's something that like I'm very grateful that I found the performers that I found and that they're willing to sort of take that risk. Um, I don't think that any of the people who are working on soundtracks are going to make my performers look dumb or ridiculous, uh, but that is like a risk that the performers are taking.
Yeah, and a certain amount of trust, I would imagine, is necessary in
Yeah.
that, which to me sounds really exciting if you can pull it off, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think part of that too is carefully choosing composers and playwrights who I trust to take this the project seriously, but also approach it with a kind of care for the people who are involved.
Yeah.
And so I do also think that I'm lucky to have found the I'm calling everyone composers, even the playwrights, because it's easy, but to have found the composers that I have found, I think I'm very lucky.
Yeah, well, okay, that's great. So who are you working with on the show? And like what is this collaboration been like for you with either your composers or your actors or all the above?
At Stanford, there are two performers, Vinny Anderson and Dee Fukunaga, um, and they are devising movement and will be performing. And then composers from Stanford are, oh, I'm not going to remember everyone's name, but from Taps, I will say that Danielle Adair is composing and performing a text, and Lucas Beisch is also composing and performing a text. Um, and then there are three composers from the music department. And then also, so I worked with five people before this quarter down in San Antonio, Texas, where I'm from, to develop some of the movement for the piece. Because I think because this is part of the developmental series, so I'm anticipating that this won't be the end of life for this performance. I think this is going to be an important development opportunity, and then it will continue to have more life in other forms and locations.
Yeah, it feels like that's such a I don't know, it feels like an exciting use of the developmental slot is a testing ground for like a really, like um low risk, high reward opportunity for experimentation and developing an idea that then we can go out into the world and develop even further and put on. So that's really exciting to hear. So we're getting nearer to the end of our time here, but I wanted to ask lastly, like in what ways do you feel like this performance or this process or both like is in conversation with other contemporary or historical like experimental theater practices? It feels like it might be in a kind of lineage, but I'm curious if there's any touchstones for you as you've been thinking about this process.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, a ton actually. So, like, I think the immediate two people that come to mind are John Cage and Merce Cunningham, because they often worked in a way where the specific content of the sound or the specific content of the performance, the movement performance, didn't didn't affect each other until performance. And so they worked with sort of time scores instead of one listening to the music and choreographing to it, or the opposite, choreographing first and then composing music for that choreography. Um, and I think I've been thinking a lot about this. There's a theater, no, film thing from back in the olden days when they were still figuring out what film could do on a theoretical level. There's a film thing called the Kuleshov effect, and it's an experiment. It was an experiment dealing with like how montage operates. So in the cut from one thing to another, um, like what is the relation? How is that relationship perceived by an audience? And so like the Kuleshov effect just means that like literally the same strip of film is perceived in different ways depending on the strips of film before and after it. So like um, people will understand a close up of a face. People will understand that close up of a face differently depending on if the shot before that close up is a woman in a bathing suit or a bowl of soup, even though it's exactly the same shot. And so I think that there's a connection to unit operations in that kind of like the context around something affecting the way that thing is perceived.
Yeah, totally. I remember learning about the Kuleshov effect in my undergrad intro to film studies class, and it totally blew my mind. And it's really I don't know. It's exciting to think about this in the context of performance, and in particularly in the context of your performance, because it sounds like you're taking this Kuleshov effect and then you're kind of multiplying it almost exponentially just based on the number of options the audience has, and then the fact that it's a collective performance. Like there's going to be a bunch of people in the audience who are all having differing and conflicting experiences at the same time, even like with themselves, because they can switch the audio and have a different experience from the moment they were having from the experience they were having a moment before, and also like they're having a different experience from the person on the left and the right of them. So that feels like I don't know a really exciting atmosphere to be in.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the things that I'm most excited about finding out because I don't know what's going to happen, but being able to hear people's experiences afterwards, I think I'm really excited about.
Fantastic. Well, we are all out of time. So I am so excited to see the unit operations here are highly specific, opening on May 8th in Pigott Theater. More details are listed in the podcast description for anyone who'd like to snag a ticket. And thank you so much, Daniel, for taking the time to talk with me today. And I can't wait to see your work.
Yeah, thank you. This has been so great.